All right, let's talk about socialism. Socialism is all the rage. Socialism is popular because capitalism works. When politicians like Bernie Sanders and pundits like Bill Maher say that Americans like socialism, they're right. The American people like getting free things that other people pay for, because the American people are people, and all people like free stuff. Americans also like opioids and having sex with strangers. We all like a lot of things that aren't good for us. But what makes socialism so attractive right now is that capitalism has already done so much of its wonderful work. We've got iPhones and computers, medicine, cars, poor people who are richer than rich people used to be. We have those things already, which we wouldn't have had if we'd been socialist all this time. And we can't imagine the things that capitalism is yet to deliver, and which it won't deliver if we have socialism now. A cure for Alzheimer's, a brain implant that increases your IQ, that thing in Star Trek that beams you up places. All those things might exist, but they won't exist if we take away the freedom and billion-dollar incentives that move people to invent them. Although, let me tell you right now, if they do have that beam me up thing, I am not getting on. It's insane. Because in America, capitalism has made us so rich, so happy, that we feel free to destroy it. We've already got the stuff it creates, and we can't imagine the even much more wonderful future it will give us. That's why Trump's crazy CPAC speech over the weekend was sane, and Bernie Sanders and the AOC Democrats are absolutely out of their minds. Well, Trump, his demeanor is out there, and there's just no question. You compare him to other presidents we've had, certainly recently, certainly since the war, World War II, he's just really different. He's a real character. He's an enormous, weird, wild character. Some of the stuff he says, I don't like. Some of the way he behaves, I don't like. But he's making sense. Now let's take a look at the opposition. Let's take a look at Bernie Sanders, who doesn't talk like that, who talks kind of in a normal, especially for a New Yorker, talks in a kind of normal way. He's on Seth Meyers, I believe. That's Seth Meyers, right, guys? Yeah, okay. He's talking to Seth Meyers, and Seth is setting him up. Meyers is setting him up, and the audience is applauding everything he says. So let's listen to Bernie's speech.
I never use the word left. Yeah, I don't. I'm a democratic socialist, so that's the way it is. But the issues that we talk about, is it left to say that in this country we should have a minimum wage that is a living wage? Is it left to say that everybody should have health care as a right, that we should expand Social Security because so many of our people can't make it, elderly people can't make it on $12,000, $13,000 a year? Is it left to say that we have to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and create millions and millions of jobs? Is it left to say that we have to address the crisis of climate change? Or that we have to deal with criminal justice reform or immigration reform? We have to deal with sexism, racism, and homophobia. I don't think those are left issues. I think sometimes the media makes a big deal about it. I think, in fact, on all of those issues and more, sensible gun safety legislation, I think you have the strong majority of the American people saying, yeah, I agree with that.
It's interesting because to some degree, he's probably right. To some degree, if you say to people, should there be a minimum wage? Should we have, free health care? Should we have more Social Security? Something that the Democrats are moving. They didn't run on that, but they're moving to do it because for a couple of reasons, because things are so good and people don't know where that goodness comes from. They think that, we stand on the shoulders of giants and we think that we're flying. We stand in this wealthy country with all the gizmos we have, all the things we can do, and you can call up the culture of the universe, with a keyboard. People who were born after a certain time don't know how that happened. It happened because there was freedom and there was incentive, and guys sat in their garage and said, hey, maybe we can make a computer. Maybe, they dropped out of college. These guys weren't educated by people who thought they were experts. These guys made this stuff themselves and became billionaires. And now, Bill Gates is one of the great philanthropists in the world. You may not like what he's giving to, but he's given his money away. Who wants to stop them? You only want to stop them because you can't imagine the future. Socialism is always about stealing the stuff that people made in the past. You notice you ask occasional Cortex, Alexandria occasional Cortex, how are you going to pay for that? She says, well, how do we pay for wars? How do we pay for that? She doesn't know. She doesn't know where that money comes from. It came from capitalism. It came from people being free enough to create the incredible wealth. Stop capitalism, you stop the wealth. And you don't know the things that are coming. You don't know the fantastic stuff that capitalism has yet to create. There's an entire world that we've never seen before, that I may never get to see, that capitalism will create, that you don't see. So you don't know what you're sacrificing when you say, oh yeah, let's have free healthcare. You don't know that you're getting rid of them. That is going to get rid of the medicine that might cure your Alzheimer's when you're older. You don't know that that's going to happen. He says the minimum wage. The minimum wage destroys jobs. In Oregon, they just passed a law mandating rent control. That's going to bring down rent control. Oregon has a problem with the price of property, with the price of rent, because it passed a law limiting the growth of cities. Small, and Oregon is growing. So smaller and smaller cities can't grow because they're protecting the farms. They're always protecting the past. They're protecting the past so they can't grow into the future. So now there aren't enough apartments. So now rent is too high. What do? We mandate that you can't raise the rent. We have a law that says you can't raise the rent past 7%. So what do the builders do? They say, well, I'll build in Omaha. I'll build somewhere else, or I'll only build apartments for rich people. That's what essentially in New York, Manhattan has rent control. It has emptied the city. It has emptied the island of Manhattan of middle class people. They're all in the boroughs now. Manhattan used to thrive. It used to be one of the very few places, urban spaces in America where people could live, But once you have rent control, at first the government screws it up, and then the government says, you know what you need? You know who has to fix this? The government. The government has to fix this. It's like you're inviting a plumber to your house, and he floods the house, and he says, you know what you need? You need to hire me to fix that. That's what it's like. So Bernie is talking, first of all, he calls himself a Democrat socialist. He's a communist. This is a guy who praised Castro, who praised the Soviet Union, honeymooned in the Soviet Union. You remember that thing? We have that clip about the bread lines. Listen to this.
It's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
Bread lines are a good thing. That's Bernie Sanders' America. That is Bernie Sanders' future. He doesn't know. He thinks, how can I pillage the wealth of the past to give stuff to everybody, instead of thinking, let's have the risk and the excitement and the freedom of the future. And people will have more stuff than you've ever seen before. It's just because he hasn't seen it before. He can't imagine it. He doesn't think it's there. Socialism is all about the past. Socialism is all about pillaging the past. It used to be socialism was take over the means of production, right? And then spread the wealth, give the wealth to whoever needs it or wants it. That didn't work, because when you take over the means of production, the government ruins everything. They can't run stuff. So the companies failed in the Soviet Union. At first it was great. You modernized everything. And then, of course, it all collapsed. But now they don't do that anymore. Now they say, let's have free market societies, and then we'll just steal all the money. But that does the same thing. It just takes a little bit longer. There was a really interesting exchange on ABC, it was, where Matthew Dowd, do we have this one? Yeah. Let me just see. Oh, there it is. 10. So Michael Dowd was saying, the people saying the same thing Bernie was saying, that the people love this stuff. The Democrats represent the people. And Sarah Fagan, who is, I think, an old Bush administration hand, responded. Let's listen to this exchange.
The Democratic Party has moved farther to the left, will move farther to the left by the end of this process than the Republican Party moved to the right over the last decade. And the most important and arguably influential Democrat isn't able to run, Congresswoman, Ocasio-Cortez. And she's the intellectual drive now on the Democratic Party. And we see these candidates falling over themselves to adopt her positions, and it's going to be very costly.
Where most Democratic voters are. But where most voters are much closer to where the Democrats are than the Republicans are. Mm-hmm. Most voters support dealing with climate change.
Healthcare.
Most voters don't support the wall at the border. Most voters support increased taxes on the very wealthy. So all of these things, the Democrats are much closer to where the country is than the Republicans
That's true in a polling context. It's not true when you lay out this policy.
See, the more you know. That's what she's saying. And she's absolutely right. And that's when Bernie says, yeah, they want all this stuff. They want all this stuff. Yeah, they want opioids and, wild sex, too. But those are not things that actually help you in the future. Those are things that you want in the moment. And you think, you know what? Then in the future, I'm a dead guy and it's all unpleasant. So you don't do it. Socialism is exactly the same way. Of course you want it. It's free stuff. Why wouldn't you want it? It's just that it destroys the future that you haven't yet imagined. The New York Post ran an editorial, their editorial board, basically saying that people don't love socialism because they don't know what it is. It says millennials, ignorant of socialism's appalling economic and human rights history, increasingly embrace socialism and its naively unrealistic prescriptions for ending all human want. Yet so are a growing number of veteran Democratic pals who should know better but are clearly terrified by the growing star power of the likes of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Gallup reports that 57% of Democrats have a positive view of socialism, but do they even have any idea what they're talking about? The same poll shows respondents supporting small business and free enterprise and rejecting the idea that government is doing too little. See, if you ask people, do you want free health care? They say yes, of course. But if you ask them, do you want there to be new medicines that will cure cancer and that will cure Alzheimer's and all these things? They say yes, too. But you can't have both. You cannot have both because socialism pillages the past and leaves nothing for the future. Capitalism builds the future. They go on to say today's democratic socialists don't seem to embrace the classic definition of socialism as government controls the means of production. These socialists insist they don't support repressive states like the Soviet Union or North Korea. Instead, they point to Scandinavian-style socialism in nations like Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden as true socialism. One problem is those countries aren't socialist. As Danish Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen has said, Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. But those guys are inventing nothing. They invented the paperclip. They live off the stuff that we invent here because we're free. That's what they live off. You know, it's just amazing. We're creating the future. They're just spending the money that they make, basically, so they have no future. They only have a past. Capitalism requires risk. It requires trust. It requires optimism. Socialism, it plays on fear and desire. That's what it plays on.